My parents sold my house to pay off my sister's gambling debt, then had the nerve to show up at my apartment asking where they were supposed to live now. What they didn't know was that I'd already bought their dream retirement home, and I was about to give them the eviction notice of their lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Natasha Caldwell, and this is the story of how my own family tried to destroy everything I'd worked for, and how I made sure they learned exactly what betrayal feels like. It started 3 years ago when I was 28, living in the small mountain town of Pine Valley, Colorado. I'd just bought my first house, a beautiful 2-bedroom craftsman with original hardwood floors and a wraparound porch that overlooked the valley. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every improvement came from my salary as a nurse at Pine Valley Medical Center. I'd saved for 4 years to make that down payment. 4 years of working double shifts, skipping vacations, and saying no to nights out with friends. While my younger sister Veronica was partying her way through college on my parents' dime, I was building something real, something permanent. My parents, Robert and Linda Caldwell, had always made it clear that Veronica was their favorite. She was the baby, the creative one, the one who could do no wrong. When she dropped out of art school to find herself in Las Vegas, they called it exploring her passions. When she came home broke after 6 months, they welcomed her with open arms and a rebuilt college fund. Prisa. But I was the responsible one. The one who paid her own way through nursing school. The one who helped them with their mortgage when Dad's construction business hit a rough patch. The one who always had her life together. So when I invited them over for dinner to show off my new place, I expected them to be proud. The house was everything I'd dreamed of. Bright, cozy, and completely debt-free, except for the mortgage. I'd even planted a small garden in the backyard and hung family photos in the hallway. "It's lovely, honey," Mom said, but there was something off about her smile. She kept glancing at Dad, like they were sharing some secret I wasn't part of. Dad was quieter than usual, just nodding and making generic comments about the layout. They left early, claiming they had plans with neighbors, but I saw them drive straight home from my kitchen window. That should have been my first warning sign. The second came 2 weeks later when Veronica called me, sobbing. She was back in Vegas, and she was in trouble. Big trouble. "Tasha, I messed up," she cried into the phone. "I owe some really bad people a lot of money." My stomach dropped. "How much money, Ronnie?" $85,000. I nearly dropped the phone. "What? How is that even possible?" Through her tears, the story came out. She'd been gambling at high-stakes poker tables, convinced she had a system. When she started losing, she borrowed money from the wrong people to chase her losses. Now they were threatening her, and she had 2 weeks to pay up or face consequences she wouldn't specify, but that terrified her. "I need help," she whispered. "I can't tell Mom and Dad. It would kill them." "Ronnie, I don't have that kind of money," I said, which was true. I had maybe $15,000 in savings, and that was my emergency fund. "Can't you take out a loan? Use your house as collateral?" The suggestion made my blood run cold. "Absolutely not. I'm not risking my home for your gambling problem. You need to tell Mom and Dad, or better yet, you need to go to the police if these people are threatening you." She hung up on me. For 3 days, I didn't hear from any of them. No calls, no texts. I figured Veronica was being dramatic and would eventually come home to face the music. I went to work, came home to my beautiful house, and tried not to worry about my sister's self-created crisis. Then I got the call that changed everything. It was Tuesday morning, and I was getting ready for my shift when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Pine Valley County Clerk's office. "Miss Caldwell? This is Janet Morrison from the county clerk. I'm calling about the property transfer that was recorded yesterday for 1247 Maple Ridge Drive. My address, my house." "I'm sorry, there must be a mistake," I said, my voice sounding strange even to me. "No mistake. The deed shows the property was transferred from Natasha Caldwell to Robert and Linda Caldwell yesterday at 3:47 p.m. I'm calling because there seems to be some irregularity with the signatures, and we need to verify. I hung up. My hands were shaking as I called my parents' house. It went straight to voicemail. I tried their cell phones. Nothing. Chahe. I called in sick to work and drove straight to the courthouse. Janet Morrison was a kind woman in her 50s who looked genuinely confused as she pulled up my file on her computer. "The deed transfer shows you signed the property over to your parents yesterday," she said, pointing to the screen. "But when I tried to call to confirm some details, I realized the phone number on file was disconnected. And honestly, Miss Caldwell, the signature doesn't look quite right to me." She showed me the paperwork. There was my forged signature, witnessed by a notary I'd never met, transferring ownership of my house to my parents for the sum of $1. "This is fraud," I whispered. Janet's expression softened. "I was afraid of that. We see it sometimes with elder abuse cases. But this is different." I stumbled out of the courthouse and sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to process what had happened. My own parents had stolen my house. They'd forged my signature and stolen the one thing I'd worked hardest for in my life. But why? The answer came when I finally reached Veronica that evening. "Oh, thank God," she said when she answered my call. "Mom and Dad came through. They sold their house and paid off my debt. I'm safe, Tasha. I'm coming home tomorrow." "They sold their house?" I asked, confused. "Well, not their house exactly. They said they had a property they could liquidate quickly. Some investment property or something." I didn't ask too many questions. I was just grateful. "Investment property. My house. They'd stolen my house and sold it to pay off Veronica's gambling debt to dangerous people." That night I lay in my bed, which might not be my bed much longer, and stared at the ceiling. Everything I'd worked for, sacrificed for, saved for, was gone. My parents had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible, and they'd done it to save their golden child from the consequences of her own actions. But as I lay there in the dark, something else started growing inside me alongside the hurt and anger. A plan. They thought they could steal from me and face no consequences. They thought I'd just accept it, probably help them figure out their own housing situation, now that they'd made themselves homeless to save Veronica. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. Because while they were busy stealing my house, I'd been busy learning everything I could about their finances. And I'd discovered something very interesting about their retirement plans. Something they had no idea I knew about. Something that was about to become the foundation of their worst nightmare. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Let me take you back to the beginning, to show you exactly what my parents stole from me and why their betrayal cut so deep. 2 years before this nightmare began, I was living in a cramped studio apartment above Henderson's Bakery on Main Street. The place smelled like cinnamon rolls every morning, which sounds charming until you realize the scent never leaves your clothes and you can't eat breakfast pastries without feeling nauseous. I was 26, working as a registered nurse at Pine Valley Medical Center, pulling every extra shift I could get. While other nurses complained about mandatory overtime, I volunteered for it. Weekend shifts, holiday coverage, filling in for sick colleagues. I said yes to everything. My coworkers thought I was either incredibly dedicated or slightly insane. The truth was simpler. I had a goal. Every paycheck, I put away 60% of my earnings. I lived on rice, beans, and whatever leftovers I could grab from the hospital cafeteria. I drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic that required a prayer and 3 tries to start every morning. My entire wardrobe consisted of scrubs for work and the same 5 outfits for everything else. My social life was non-existent. While my friends from nursing school were going out for drinks and weekend trips to Denver, I was working or studying for certifications that would bump up my pay grade. They'd invite me out, and I'd make excuses about being tired or broke, which wasn't really an excuse, it was just the truth. But every sacrifice had a purpose. Pinned to the wall above my tiny kitchen table was a real estate listing I'd printed out 6 months earlier. 1247 Maple Ridge Drive. A 1,200-square-foot craftsman-style house built in 1925, sitting on a quarter-acre lot with mature pine trees and a view of the valley that took your breath away. The asking price was $185,000, which might as well have been $1 million on my salary. But I'd done the math. If I could save $37,000 for a down payment, I could get a mortgage I could actually afford. That meant saving roughly $1,500 every month for 2 years. Told me. Most people would have said it was impossible. My parents certainly did. "Sweetheart, you're being unrealistic," Mom had said when I first told them about my plan. "Houses are for families, for people who are settled. You're still young. You should be enjoying life, not tying yourself down with a mortgage." Dad was more direct. "You'll never save that much money on a nurse's salary. Maybe look at condos instead. Something more in your price range." But I wasn't most people, and I definitely wasn't going to settle for their limited vision of what I could achieve. I picked up a second job doing private nursing care on my days off. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, an 78-year-old retired teacher who'd broken her hip, needed someone to help with daily activities while she recovered. The pay was good, and Mrs. Whitman turned out to be the kind of tough, no-nonsense woman who reminded me why I'd fallen in love with nursing in the first place. "You've got steel in your spine, dear," she told me one afternoon as I helped her with physical therapy exercises. "Most young people your age are afraid of hard work. They want everything handed to them." Mrs. Whitman became my biggest cheerleader. When I told her about the house, she didn't say it was impossible. She said, "Then you better get to work." And I did. I took on extra private clients through the weekends. I started a small side business helping elderly residents with medication management and basic health monitoring. Every certification I earned meant a slight pay increase. Every extra shift meant more money in the house fund. Really? The numbers became my obsession. I had a spreadsheet that I updated weekly, tracking every dollar saved, every milestone reached. $5,000. $10,000. $15,000. Each benchmark felt like climbing a mountain, but I kept climbing. My parents watched this marathon of sacrifice with a mixture of admiration and concern. Mom would bring me casseroles because she worried I wasn't eating enough. Dad would offer to loan me money for small treats, a dinner out, new clothes, a weekend trip. But I always declined. Every dollar that didn't go toward necessities went toward the house. "You're missing out on your 20s, Veronica told me during one of her visits home from college. She was majoring in art therapy, a degree my parents were funding entirely while I was grinding myself into the ground to save for a down payment. "I'm building my future," I replied, showing her my latest bank statement. I was at $28,000. Almost there. "But what's the point of having a future if you never enjoy the present?" she asked, genuinely confused by my choices. I tried to explain it to her, the feeling of control that came with having a plan, the security of knowing I was building something permanent, the pride that would come with signing my name on a deed, knowing I'd earned every square foot through my own effort. She didn't get it. How could she? Everything had always been given to her. But Mrs. Whitman understood. "There's no shortcut to anywhere worth going," she told me. "You're learning something your sister never will, that the things you work hardest for are the things you'll fight hardest to keep." Those words would prove more prophetic than either of us realized. The final push to $37,000 came during the winter flu season. The hospital was overwhelmed, and they were offering time-and-a-half pay for anyone willing to work consecutive double shifts. I volunteered for everything. For 6 weeks, I practically lived at the hospital, sleeping in the on-call room between shifts. My parents worried I was pushing too hard. "You look exhausted, honey," Mom said when I stopped by for dinner one Sunday, my first day off in 2 weeks. "I'm fine," I insisted, though I was running on caffeine and pure determination. "I'm almost there," and I was. By March, I had $38,500 in my savings account, enough for the down payment, closing costs, and a small emergency fund. I called the realtor the next day. Evicted. The house had been on the market for 3 months, and the sellers were motivated. We negotiated the price down to $178,000, and suddenly, everything I'd dreamed about for 2 years was within reach. The day I got pre-approved for the mortgage was the best day of my life up to that point. I called my parents, crying happy tears for the first time in months. "We're so proud of you," Dad said, and I could hear the genuine emotion in his voice. "You did something incredible, Natasha. You set a goal that seemed impossible, and you achieved it through pure hard work." The closing was scheduled for April 15th. I took that day off work and wore the one nice dress I owned, a navy blue sheath I'd bought for nursing school graduation. I sat at that conference table, signed paper after paper, and when the title company representative handed me the keys, I felt like I could conquer the world. 1247 Maple Ridge Drive was mine. The house was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. Hardwood floors that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, a kitchen with vintage cabinets and enough counter space to actually cook, a master bedroom with windows that looked out over the valley, a second bedroom that I turned into a home office, a living room with a brick fireplace where I could picture hosting holidays someday. But most importantly, it was mine. Every mortgage payment I made was building equity instead of disappearing into a landlord's pocket. Every improvement I made was an investment in my own future. I spent my first night in the house sitting on the living room floor. I couldn't afford furniture yet, eating takeout Chinese food and watching the sunset through the big front windows. I'd never felt so proud or so hopeful about the future. That house represented everything I'd worked for: my independence, my security, my proof that hard work and sacrifice could actually pay off. Mirrors. It was the foundation of the life I was building, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. Which is exactly why losing it felt like losing a piece of my soul, and why getting it back was going to require every ounce of the determination that had helped me earn it in the first place. 6 months after I moved into 1247 Maple Ridge Drive, I decided it was time to celebrate properly. Not just the house, but everything it represented. My independence, my hard work paying off, and the fact that I'd finally created the life I'd always dreamed of. I'd spent those first months slowly furnishing the place, piece by piece. A sectional sofa from a clearance sale at Johnson's Furniture. A dining table I found at an estate sale and refinished myself during weekends. Kitchen appliances I'd saved up for and bought one at a time. Every addition felt like a victory. The house was finally starting to feel like a home, and I wanted to share that with the people who mattered most to me. I planned a housewarming party for the first Saturday in October. Nothing too fancy. I still couldn't afford caterers or elaborate decorations, but I wanted it to be special. I spent 2 weeks planning the menu, making lists, and preparing everything I could in advance. The guest list was small but meaningful. My closest friends from work: Jessica, my fellow nurse who'd covered for me countless times during my house-saving marathon; Dr. Amanda Torres, who'd become a mentor and friend; and Mike Chen from the maintenance crew, who'd always been kind when I was working those brutal double shifts. I invited Mrs. Whitman, of course. She'd become like a grandmother to me, and her encouragement had been crucial during those difficult saving months. Her hip had healed beautifully, and she was back to her independent self, but we'd maintained our friendship. And naturally, I invited my family. Despite their initial skepticism about my house buying plan, they'd been genuinely proud when I'd achieved my goal. This party felt like the perfect opportunity to show them what their daughter and sister had accomplished. The morning of the party, I woke up early and spent hours cooking. Homemade lasagna, Mom's recipe, the one thing she'd taught me that I'd actually mastered. Fresh bread from scratch, a salad with vegetables from the small garden I'd planted in the backyard. Apple pie made with fruit from the old tree that came with the property. Everything had to be perfect. I cleaned the house until it sparkled, arranged flowers I'd picked from my garden in mason jars throughout the rooms, and set up a playlist of music that felt like celebration. Upbeat, but not overwhelming. The kind of background music that encouraged conversation. At 2 p.m., I stood in my living room and looked around with satisfaction. The afternoon light was streaming through the windows, casting warm shadows across the hardwood floors. The brick fireplace had a small fire crackling, more for ambiance than warmth. The dining table was set with the nice dishes I'd splurged on at Target. Everything looked welcoming and homey. I felt beautiful, too, wearing a new dress I'd finally allowed myself to buy. A forest green wrap dress that made me feel confident and adult in a way my usual scrubs never did. For the first time in years, I felt like I could relax and actually enjoy something I'd worked for. Jessica arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine and a huge smile. Tasha, this place is incredible, she said, doing a slow turn in the living room. I can't believe you actually did it. When you first told me about saving for a house, I thought you were crazy. But look at this place. Dr. Torres came next, bringing flowers and genuine amazement at what I'd accomplished. You should be so proud, she told me, squeezing my hands. I've known a lot of nurses over the years, and very few have the discipline and determination you showed. This house is proof of your character. Mrs. Whitman arrived with Mike Chen, who'd offered to drive her. She brought homemade cookies and tears in her eyes as she toured the house properly for the first time. Oh dear, she said, standing in the kitchen and looking out at the view of the valley. This is everything you dreamed it would be, isn't it? It was. Standing there with these people who had supported me, encouraged me, and watched me work toward this goal, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude and accomplishment. This wasn't just a house. It was proof that I could set an impossible goal and achieve it through sheer determination. My parents arrived at 3:30, fashionably late as always, with Veronica in tow. She was home from college for the weekend, and I was excited to show her how the house had evolved since her last visit. Welcome to my home, I said, opening the door with a huge smile. Mom stepped inside and immediately began her tour, making all the right appreciative noises. Oh, Natasha, you've done such a beautiful job decorating. That sofa is perfect for the space, and the kitchen looks so bright and cheerful. Dad was quieter but seemed genuinely impressed. He spent a long time examining the woodwork, running his hands along the original trim and commenting on the craftsmanship. They don't build them like this anymore, he said. You got a good one, kiddo. Veronica seemed distracted, but I attributed that to college stress. She was in her junior year, and I knew the coursework was getting more challenging. She complimented the house politely, but spent most of her time on her phone, texting friends back at school. The party hit its stride around 4 p.m. Everyone was mingling, the food was getting rave reviews, and the conversation was flowing as smoothly as the wine. I found myself moving from group to group, playing hostess in my own home for the first time, and loving every minute of it. Dr. Torres pulled me aside at one point. You know what I love about this, she said, gesturing around the room. You can see how much thought you put into every detail. This isn't just a house you bought, it's a home you created. There's a difference. I felt tears prick my eyes. She was right. Every single thing in that house represented a choice I'd made, a priority I'd set, a small dream I'd made real. The coffee table I'd found at a thrift store and restored. The curtains I'd sewn myself because I couldn't afford custom ones. The herb garden outside the kitchen window that provided fresh basil and oregano for cooking. Around 5 p.m., I gathered everyone in the living room for a toast. I'd been thinking about what I wanted to say for weeks, and I felt nervous but excited to share my feelings with these important people. I just want to thank all of you for being here, I began, raising my glass of wine. This house represents 2 years of the hardest work I've ever done, but I couldn't have achieved it without your support and encouragement. I looked at each face in turn. Jessica, who'd covered my shifts when I was exhausted. Dr. Torres, who'd written recommendation letters for my certification programs. Mrs. Whitman, who'd reminded me that anything worth having was worth working for. Mike, who'd always had a kind word during those brutal overnight shifts. To family and friends who believe in you even when your dreams seem impossible, I said. And to the amazing feeling of building something with your own 2 hands and your own determination. Everyone raised their glasses, and there was a moment of perfect contentment. I was surrounded by people I cared about, in a home I'd earned, celebrating an achievement that had seemed impossible just 3 years earlier. Mom dabbed at her eyes with the napkin. We're so proud of you, sweetheart, she said. You've built something really special here. Dad nodded in agreement. When you first told us about this crazy plan to save for a house, I'll admit I was worried you were setting yourself up for disappointment. But you proved us wrong. You proved a lot of people wrong. Even Veronica put down her phone long enough to hug me. Your house is beautiful, Tasha, she said. I'm really happy for you. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction and peace. This was what success felt like. Not just the achievement itself, but the ability to share it with people you loved, in a space that was entirely your own. Mrs. Whitman was the last to leave. As Mike helped her to his car, she squeezed my hand one more time. "Remember this feeling, dear," she said quietly. "Remember how proud you are right now, how safe and accomplished you feel. Life has a way of testing us, and there will be times when you need to remember exactly how strong and capable you are." I thought it was just the wisdom of age, the kind of general advice older people give younger ones. I had no idea how prophetic her words would prove to be. After everyone left, I walked through my quiet house, collecting glasses and plates, savoring the lingering signs of celebration. The fireplace was dying down to embers. The flowers were still fresh and beautiful. The whole place smelled like home-cooked food and happiness. I stood in my kitchen, looking out at the view of the valley and the fading light, and felt more content than I ever had in my life. This was my sanctuary, my achievement, my future. Nothing could take it away from me. Or so I thought. Because while I was celebrating my independence and security, other people were watching and calculating. People who saw my success not as inspiration, but as opportunity. People who believed that family meant they were entitled to share in achievements they'd never worked for. People who were already making plans that would shatter my perfect, peaceful world. 3 weeks after my housewarming party, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, my entire world shifted on its axis. I was getting ready for my 7 a.m. shift, enjoying my usual routine of coffee and toast while watching the sunrise through my kitchen window, when my phone rang. Veronica's name appeared on the screen, which was unusual. She rarely called before noon, and never on weekdays when she had classes. My first thought was that something had happened to our parents. "Ronnie, what's wrong?" I answered immediately. The sound that came through the phone made my blood run cold. She was sobbing. Not the dramatic tears she'd used as a child to get her way, but raw, terrified crying that spoke of genuine panic. "Tasha, I need help," she choked out between gasps. "I'm in trouble, real trouble." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, my coffee growing cold as she told me the story. It came out in fragments, broken up by crying jags and long pauses where I could hear her trying to compose herself. She'd been gambling. Not the occasional poker night with friends that she'd mentioned casually over the years, but serious, high-stakes gambling in Las Vegas. She'd started small during a spring break trip, but what began as entertainment had spiraled into addiction. She'd been skipping classes to drive to nearby casinos, using her student loan money to fund increasingly desperate bets. "I thought I could win it back," she kept repeating. "I had a system. I was so close to breaking even." But instead of breaking even, she'd gotten deeper and deeper into debt. When the casinos cut off her credit, she'd turned to private lenders, the kind of people who didn't require credit checks or collateral, but who charged interest rates that would make loan sharks blush. "How much, Ronnie?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. $85,000? The number hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped out loud, dropping my piece of toast onto the floor. "That's impossible," I said. "How could you possibly owe that much money?" Through her tears, she explained how the debt had compounded. A $5,000 loss became $10,000 when she borrowed to try to win it back. $10,000 became $20,000, then $40,000, then more than she could even calculate, because the interest was accumulating faster than she could keep track of. "The people I owe money to aren't like banks, Tasha," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They came to my apartment. They know where I go to school, where I work. They gave me 2 weeks to come up with the full amount, or—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. We both knew what "or" meant. "Ronnie, you have to go to the police," I said immediately. "If these people are threatening you—" "I can't," she interrupted. "You don't understand. These aren't the kind of people you report to the police. That would just make things worse. I need the money, Tasha. That's the only way out of this." I closed my eyes and tried to think clearly. $85,000. It might as well have been 85 million. I had maybe 12,000 in my savings account, money I'd been slowly rebuilding after my house down payment. My credit cards were paid off, but their limits combined wouldn't even cover half of what she owed. I don't have that kind of money, I told her gently. Ronnie, I wish I could help, but I just bought the house. All my savings went to the down payment and closing costs. But you have equity in the house now, right? She said, and I could hear the desperation sharpening her voice. You could take out a home equity loan. Or maybe a second mortgage? The suggestion made my stomach lurch. Ronnie, no, I'm not risking my house for this. That's my home, my security. I worked for years to get it. It's just money, she exploded. It's just a house. I'm talking about my life here, Tasha. These people will hurt me. They'll hurt our family to get to me. Then you need to tell Mom and Dad, I said firmly. This is too big for me to handle alone. They need to know what's happening. The line went quiet for so long, I thought she'd hung up. I can't tell them, she finally whispered. It would destroy them. Dad's construction business is barely breaking even. Mom's been talking about how proud they are that both their daughters are finally settled and responsible. If they find out I've thrown away my education, that I'm mixed up with dangerous people, it would kill them. Ronnie, please, Tasha, you're the only person I can turn to. You're the only one in our family who has anything. I know it's a lot to ask, but you could get the loan, pay off my debt, and I'll pay you back. I'll drop out of school if I have to. I'll get a job, make payments. I'll sign anything you want. I was quiet for a long moment, trying to process what she was asking. She wanted me to risk everything I'd worked for, my house, my financial security, my future, to bail her out of a crisis she'd created through her own reckless choices. I can't do it, I said finally. I'm sorry, but I can't risk my house. There has to be another way. There is no other way, she screamed. Don't you get it? I'm going to disappear, Tasha. These people don't make empty threats. And when they can't find me, they'll start looking at my family. They already know about you, about Mom and Dad. They know where you live. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean they know where I live? They did research on me, on all of us. They know you just bought a house. They know what it's worth. They mentioned it specifically when they talked about collateral for the debt. I felt physically sick. These dangerous people knew about my house, my beautiful sanctuary that I'd worked so hard for. They saw it as an asset that could be leveraged to pay Veronica's gambling debt. I need an answer by tomorrow, Veronica continued. They're expecting me to have a plan, to show them how I'm going to get the money, if I don't. She started crying again, and despite my anger and fear, my heart broke for her. She was my little sister, the baby of the family, and she was genuinely terrified. But she was also asking me to destroy my life to fix hers. I need time to think, I said. This is huge, Ronnie. You're asking me to risk everything. I know, she whispered. I know it's not fair, but I don't have anyone else. Please, just think about it. Maybe there's a way to make it work. Maybe you could get a loan for part of it, and we could figure out the rest somehow. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for another 20 minutes, staring at nothing. I was going to be late for work, but I couldn't seem to make myself move. The house that had felt so secure and peaceful just an hour earlier now felt exposed, vulnerable. These strangers, these dangerous people knew where I lived. They saw my home as a resource they could potentially claim. I finally called in sick to work and spent the day researching home equity loans and second mortgages. The numbers were depressing. Even if I could qualify for additional loans against my house, which wasn't guaranteed since I'd just bought it, the payments would be more than my current salary could support. I'd be house poor at best, at risk of foreclosure at worst. But the alternative was letting my sister face whatever consequences these people had threatened. That evening, I called my parents. I didn't tell them about Veronica's situation. That wasn't my secret to share. But I asked some casual questions about their finances, their retirement plans, whether they had any investment accounts or assets I didn't know about. "We're doing fine, sweetheart," Dad said. "Nothing fancy, but we'll be comfortable when we retire. Why do you ask?" "Just wondering about family financial planning," I said vaguely, making sure we're all thinking ahead. "Well, we're proud of how well you're doing," Mom chimed in. "Buying that house was such a smart investment. Property values in Pine Valley keep going up. You're probably sitting on a nice little nest egg already." "A nest egg?" "That's exactly how Veronica saw my house, as money just sitting there, waiting to be used." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of my house settling around me, the creak of the hardwood floors, the whisper of wind through the pine trees outside my bedroom window, the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. All the sounds of home, of security, of the life I'd built through years of sacrifice and determination. Sounds that might not be mine much longer, whether I agreed to help Veronica or not. Because if these people were as dangerous as she claimed, if they really were researching our family and our assets, then my house was already in their crosshairs. The question wasn't whether I would lose everything I'd worked for. The question was how. I should have known that Veronica wouldn't accept my refusal quietly. What I didn't expect was how quickly she would mobilize our parents into her personal army of guilt and manipulation. And no lang so by. The campaign began the very next day. I was just finishing my morning coffee when Mom called, her voice bright and cheerful in that particular way that meant she was about to ask for something. "Good morning, sweetheart. How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Mom. Just getting ready for work." "That's wonderful, dear. I was just thinking about you yesterday, about how proud we are of everything you've accomplished. That beautiful house, your successful career, you've really built something special." I waited. There was always a but coming when Mom started conversations with excessive praise. "I was also thinking about Veronica," she continued, right on cue. "She seems so stressed lately when we talk to her. College can be overwhelming, you know. I worry about her being so far from family during such a challenging time." "She's a junior in college, Mom. She's not a child anymore." "Of course not. But you know how sensitive she's always been. She's not as naturally strong and independent as you are. Some people just need more support from their family." The word stung because I knew what she was really saying. Veronica was the delicate one who deserved protection and assistance. I was the strong one who was expected to handle everything on my own and help others while I was at it. "Has she talked to you about anything specific?" I asked carefully. "Well, she mentioned she was having some financial difficulties." "Nothing major, just the usual college expenses that add up." I told her that families help each other, especially when one member is in a position to provide support. My stomach dropped. Veronica had told them. Maybe not the full truth about the gambling and the dangerous people, but enough to get them on her side. "Mom, I know you've worked so hard for what you have, Natasha. But success brings responsibility, doesn't it? When we're blessed with good fortune, we have an obligation to help those we love." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Mom carefully dancing around any specifics, while making it clear that I was expected to help my sister with her financial difficulties. She never directly asked me to risk my house, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. I hung up, feeling manipulated and angry, but I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Dad called during my lunch break. Unlike Mom's subtle approach, he was more direct. "Natasha, your mother told me about your conversation this morning. About Veronica needing some help. Dad, the situation is more complicated than—" "I'm sure it is. But here's what I know. Your sister is in trouble, and you're in a position to help her. When I was your age, if my brother needed help and I had the means to provide it, I wouldn't have hesitated. But this isn't just about having the means," I protested. "What she's asking for would require me to take significant financial risks." "All investments involve risk," he replied. "But the return on helping family is always worth it." Besides, you're young and financially stable. You could recover from a setback. Veronica might not get another chance. Another chance at what? I wanted to ask. Another chance to gamble away borrowed money? Another chance to make reckless decisions and expect her family to bail her out? But I bit my tongue. I need time to think about it, I said. Don't take too long, Dad replied. Sometimes when people wait too long to do the right thing, it becomes the wrong thing. That evening, I got a text from Veronica. Thank you for talking to Mom and Dad. I knew you'd come around. We can figure out the details tomorrow. I stared at the message in disbelief. I hadn't agreed to anything. In fact, I'd specifically told her I couldn't help. But somehow, my parents' pressure campaign had been interpreted as my consent. I called her immediately. Ronnie, I haven't agreed to anything. I told you I can't risk my house for this. But Mom said you were going to help, she said, confusion evident in her voice. She said families support each other, and that you understood your responsibilities as the successful sister. I never said that, and I never agreed to take out loans against my house. But you have to! The desperation was creeping back into her voice. I told the people I owe money to that I had a plan, that my family was going to help me. They're expecting an answer tomorrow, Tasha. I can't show up empty-handed. You should have checked with me before making promises on my behalf. I thought once Mom and Dad talked to you, you'd understand how important this is. How much I need you. I hung up, furious at being backed into a corner by my own family. But the calls didn't stop. Over the next 3 days, I heard from every member of my extended family. Aunt Patricia called to tell me how proud my parents were of my success and how important it was to pay it forward to family members who weren't as fortunate. Uncle Robert shared a long story about how his brother had helped him during a difficult time and how that assistance had changed the trajectory of his entire life. Even my 82-year-old grandmother called. Natasha, dear, I hear your sister is going through a rough patch, she said in her wavering voice. I remember when you were both little girls how you always looked out for her. You were such a good big sister. Grandma, the situation is more complicated then. Family is never complicated, sweetheart. Family is simple. We take care of each other. That's what we do. I realized that Veronica had crafted a very specific narrative for our family. She was the struggling college student facing temporary financial difficulties. I was the successful sister with a house and stable income who was being selfish by refusing to help. The details about gambling, dangerous creditors, and the massive scale of her debt had been carefully omitted. Our family saw this as a simple case of sisterly support, not the potential financial catastrophe it actually was. The worst part was the way they talked about my house. It wasn't my home, my sanctuary, the result of years of sacrifice and hard work. It was just an asset, a resource that could be leveraged to solve family problems. That house is probably worth more now than when you bought it, Mom mentioned during one of her daily check-in calls. Real estate values in Pine Valley have been climbing steadily. You're sitting on a gold mine, sweetheart. Houses aren't just investments, Mom. This is where I live. It's my home. Of course it is, dear. But homes can serve multiple purposes. They can provide security and also provide opportunities to help the people we love. Even my friends at work started noticing my stress. Jessica cornered me in the break room on Thursday afternoon. You've been distracted all week, she said. What's going on? I found myself telling her everything. Veronica's gambling debt, the pressure from my family, the impossible position I'd been put in. That's insane, Jessica said when I finished. They want you to risk your house for your sister's gambling addiction? They don't see it that way. They think it's just temporary financial assistance between family members. But you could lose everything you worked for. I know, but they're making me feel like a selfish monster for refusing. Jessica shook her head. Your family is manipulating you. This isn't about love or loyalty. It's about enabling destructive behavior and expecting you to pay the price. She was right, but knowing that didn't make the pressure any easier to bear. By Friday, I was getting multiple calls and texts every day. My parents, Veronica, aunts and uncles, family friends who'd somehow heard about the situation. Everyone had an opinion about my obligation to help my sister. Everyone had a story about family members who'd made sacrifices for each other. No one wanted to hear about the reality of what they were asking me to do. Friday evening, I sat in my living room, the same room where I'd hosted my housewarming party just a month earlier, and looked around at everything I'd worked so hard to achieve. The furniture I'd saved for and bought piece by piece. The pictures on the walls that made the space feel like home. The view of the valley through the windows that never failed to calm me. All of it was under threat, not from strangers or natural disasters, but from my own family. My phone buzzed with another text from Veronica. The deadline is Monday morning. Please don't let me down. I turned off my phone and went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the familiar sounds of my house and wondering if I was about to lose everything because I couldn't say no to people who claimed to love me. What I didn't know was that while I was wrestling with guilt and family pressure, Veronica had already moved on to Plan B, a plan that didn't require my consent at all. Monday morning arrived with the weight of dread I'd been carrying all weekend. I'd spent Saturday and Sunday with my phone turned off, trying to find some peace in my home, but the silence felt more ominous than comforting. I knew that when I turned my phone back on, I'd be walking into a storm. Eons, I was right. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages, 2 voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize, and 1 email from Veronica with the subject line, "Final warning." I didn't read the email. I couldn't handle it before work. But the harassment followed me throughout my shift. My personal phone was supposed to stay in my locker during work hours, but the constant buzzing became impossible to ignore. Jessica noticed during our mid-morning break. "Your phone has been going off non-stop," she said. "Is everything okay?" "It's the family situation," I said quietly. Today was supposed to be Veronica's deadline. "And you still haven't agreed to help her?" "I can't, Jess. I've run the numbers a dozen times. Even if I could get approved for a home equity loan large enough to cover her debt, the payments would be more than half my take-home pay. I'd lose the house anyway, just more slowly." She shook her head in disgust. "They're going to destroy your life to save hers from the consequences of her own choices." The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to protect my house from Veronica's creditors, I might end up losing it to my own family's manipulation. When I finally checked my phone during lunch, the messages painted a picture of escalating panic. Veronica's texts had gone from pleading to desperate to accusatory. "Please call me back. They're expecting an answer today. Tasha, I'm scared. I don't know what to do. How can you just ignore me when I'm in danger? I guess I know where I stand in this family." But it was Mom's voicemail that really got to me. "Natasha, I'm disappointed in you. I raised you to care about family, to understand that we support each other through difficult times. Your sister called me crying this morning because you won't even return her calls. Whatever happened to the kind, generous girl who used to share her allowance with Veronica when she spent hers too quickly? I don't recognize the selfish person you've become." Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. I'd worked myself to exhaustion for 2 years to buy my house. I'd sacrificed social relationships, personal comfort, and financial security to achieve my goal. And now I was selfish for refusing to throw it all away for someone who'd gambled away more money than most people make in 2 years. The afternoon brought a new tactic: public pressure. I started getting messages from family friends and distant relatives I barely spoke to, all expressing concern about the situation with Veronica and their hope that the family would come together to support her. Mrs. Henderson from church texted, "Your mother mentioned Veronica is going through a hard time. What a blessing that she has a sister who's done so well for herself. I'm sure you'll find a way to help." My high school friend Sarah, who I hadn't talked to in months, suddenly reached out. "Heard through the grapevine that your sister needs some family support. So sweet that you're in a position to help her out. Family first, right?" I realized that Veronica and my parents had been spreading their version of the story throughout our entire social circle. They were creating a narrative where I was the successful, stable sister who was being asked to help her struggling sibling, a reasonable request that any decent person would honor. They conveniently left out the parts about gambling addiction, dangerous creditors, and the fact that helping Veronica would likely destroy my financial future. Tuesday brought a new level of intensity. My parents showed up at the hospital during my shift. I was coming out of a patient's room when I saw them standing at the nurse's station, talking to Jessica. Mom was crying. Actual tears, not her usual theatrical display. Dad looked haggard, older than I'd ever seen him. "Natasha!" Mom rushed toward me as soon as she spotted me. "Thank goodness! We need to talk." "I'm working," I said, aware that my colleagues were watching this family drama unfold in the middle of my workplace. "You can't just show up here. Your sister is missing," Dad said bluntly. "She left her dorm yesterday and nobody knows where she is." My heart lurched despite my anger. "What do you mean missing?" "She didn't come back to her room last night," Mom said, her voice shaking. "Her roommate called us this morning." Veronica left a note, saying she couldn't face the shame of disappointing everyone, and that she was going to, quote, handle the situation herself. The implications hung in the air like poison gas. Veronica had either run away to escape her creditors or was planning something even more desperate. "We think she might hurt herself," Mom whispered. "She sounded so hopeless when we talked to her yesterday. She kept saying that no one in the family loved her enough to help her, that she was completely alone." Dr. Torres appeared at my shoulder. "Natasha, is everything all right? Do you need to step away?" I looked at my parents' stricken faces, thought about Veronica alone somewhere, with dangerous people looking for her, and felt the walls closing in around me. "I need to take my break," I told Dr. Torres. In the hospital's small family conference room, my parents laid out their desperation in stark terms. "She's our baby," Mom said, gripping my hands. "I know she's made mistakes, but she's still our daughter, still your sister." "We've been thinking about this all night," Dad added. "What if we all work together? We could refinance our house, maybe get a second mortgage. Combined with what you could borrow against your place, we might be able to cover most of her debt." "And then what?" I asked. "We're all financially ruined, but Veronica learns that gambling away enormous amounts of money is okay because her family will always bail her out." "She'll get help," Mom insisted. "She promised she'll go to counseling, join a support group. This would just give her a chance to start over." "Mom, people with gambling addictions don't just stop because they get bailed out once. They see it as proof that they can take bigger risks because someone will always catch them when they fall." Dad's face hardened. "So you're willing to let your sister disappear, possibly get hurt, rather than take a financial risk?" "I'm willing to let her face the consequences of her own choices, rather than destroy multiple lives to save her from them." The words came out harsher than I intended, but I was exhausted from days of manipulation and emotional blackmail. Mom started crying again. "I don't understand what happened to you, Natasha. You used to be so caring, so protective of your sister. Ever since you bought that house, you've become cold and selfish." That house. Always back to that house. As if owning a home had somehow corrupted my moral character rather than being the result of years of hard work and sacrifice. "The house didn't change me," I said quietly, "but watching my family try to manipulate me into throwing away everything I've worked for has certainly opened my eyes." They left after that, but not before Dad delivered one final blow. "If something happens to Veronica because you refuse to help her, you'll have to live with that for the rest of your life." I went back to work, but I was useless for the rest of my shift. I kept thinking about Veronica, scared and alone somewhere, possibly in danger. I thought about my parents, genuinely terrified for their daughter's safety. I thought about the house I'd worked so hard for, and whether it was worth my sister's life. But I also thought about Jessica's words. They were manipulating me. This crisis, this fear, this guilt, it was all designed to break down my resistance and force me to do what they wanted. That evening, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a man's voice said simply, "We know where you live, Miss Caldwell. Your sister mentioned you might be interested in helping resolve her situation." My blood turned to ice. "Who is this?" "A friend of your sister's. She owes us money, and time is running out. She suggested that you might be willing to discuss alternative arrangements. I don't know what she told you, but..." She told us you own a nice house in Pine Valley, worth about $200,000 according to county records. That would more than cover her debt, with some left over. The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen, staring at my phone, realizing that Veronica hadn't just told these people about my house. She'd given them my address, my personal information, probably my work schedule. She'd made me a target to save herself. My phone rang again immediately. This time it was Mom. "Natasha," Veronica called. "She's okay. She's safe. But she says the people she owes money to have been asking about you. About your house." "I know. One of them just called me." "Then you understand how serious this is. These aren't normal creditors, sweetheart. These are dangerous people. If they think you're connected to Veronica's debt..." She didn't need to finish. I could see where this was heading. In trying to escape her own consequences, Veronica had pulled me directly into the line of fire. "What are you saying, Mom?" "I'm saying that maybe helping Veronica isn't just about family loyalty anymore. Maybe it's about protecting yourself too." I hung up and double-checked all my locks, closed all my curtains, and sat in my darkened living room wondering how my beautiful, peaceful home had become the center of a nightmare I'd never chosen to be part of. Outside, a car drove slowly past my house, its headlights sweeping across my windows. It didn't stop, but it didn't need to. The message was clear. I was no longer just being pressured by my family. I was being hunted. After 3 sleepless nights of checking my locks every hour and jumping at every car that drove past my house, I was starting to crack. The threatening phone call had changed everything. This was no longer just about family pressure. Dangerous people now knew where I lived, where I worked, and exactly how much my house was worth. I'd started parking in different spots, taking alternate routes home from work, and keeping my curtains closed even during the day. The sanctuary I'd worked so hard to create had become a prison of fear. Thursday morning, Mom called with what she presented as wonderful news. "Sweetheart, I have the perfect solution. Your father's birthday is this Saturday, and we're having a family dinner at Romano's. The whole family will be there. All your aunts and uncles, the cousins, even Grandma Rose is driving up from Denver." I rubbed my temples, already exhausted at 7 a.m. "Mom, I don't think this is a good time for..." "Nonsense. This is exactly what we all need. A chance to come together as a family and figure out how to help Veronica. When everyone hears the full story, I know they'll want to contribute something. We can pool our resources and come up with a solution that doesn't put all the burden on you." Despite everything, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she was right. Maybe if everyone understood the real scope of the problem, they could help find alternatives I hadn't considered. "Will Veronica be there?" I asked. "Of course. She came home last night. She's staying with us until this whole situation gets resolved. She's so relieved that the family is rallying around her." I should have recognized the setup then. Should have realized that having Veronica safely at home while telling me about a big family dinner was too convenient to be coincidental. But I was tired, scared, and desperate for any solution that didn't involve risking my house. "Okay," I said. "I'll be there." "Wonderful! 7 o'clock Saturday. And Natasha?" "Wear something nice. This is going to be a special evening." Saturday evening, I drove to Romano's Italian restaurant feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in a week. Maybe my extended family would have ideas I hadn't thought of. Maybe someone had resources I didn't know about. Maybe this nightmare could end without me losing everything I'd worked for. Romano's was a family-style restaurant that had been a Pine Valley institution for 30 years. They had a private dining room in the back that could accommodate large groups, and when I walked in, I saw that Mom hadn't been exaggerating about the guest list. 23 people were crowded around a long table covered in red checkered tablecloths. All 4 of my aunts and uncles, 6 cousins ranging in age from 16 to 45, Grandma Rose looking elegant despite her 82 years, and even a few family friends who'd been honorary relatives for as long as I could remember. Everyone stood up when I entered, and there was a chorus of greetings and hugs. For a moment, surrounded by the warmth of extended family, I felt the knot of tension in my chest loosen slightly. Veronica was there, sitting between Mom and Dad, looking pale but composed. When she saw me, she gave me a tentative smile that I tried to return. Whatever was happening, whatever mistakes she'd made, she was still my sister. "Look who's here," Dad announced loudly. "Our successful daughter, the homeowner." Everyone laughed and applauded, and I felt myself blushing as I took the empty seat they'd saved for me directly across from my parents. Dinner conversation was light at first. Updates on jobs and kids, discussion of upcoming family events, questions about my work at the hospital. I started to relax, enjoying the familiar rhythm of family gathering. This felt normal, comfortable, like the family dinners of my childhood. But as the main course was being served, I noticed Mom and Dad exchanging meaningful glances. Veronica looked nervous, fidgeting with her napkin and barely touching her food. After the server brought out Dad's birthday cake and we'd sung and taken pictures, Dad stood up and tapped his wine glass with his knife. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "It means so much to Linda and me to have our whole family together, especially during challenging times." I felt the first prickle of unease. This was starting to sound like more than a birthday speech. "As most of you know," Dad continued, "our family has been dealing with a difficult situation. Our daughter Veronica has found herself in financial trouble, and as a family, we need to come together to help her." Heads turned toward Veronica, who looked down at her plate with what appeared to be genuine shame. "Now, I know some of you might be thinking that young people need to learn from their mistakes," Dad said, his eyes scanning the table, "and normally, I'd agree with you. But this situation has gone beyond normal consequences. Veronica's safety is at risk." Murmurs of concern rippled around the table. Aunt Patricia reached over to squeeze Veronica's hand. Uncle Robert looked genuinely alarmed. "The people she owes money to are not the kind of people who accept payment plans or negotiate settlements," Dad continued. "They've made it clear that if the debt isn't paid in full, they'll take other measures to recover their money." "How much does she owe?" asked my cousin Michael, who worked in finance. $85,000, Dad said simply. The number landed like a bomb. Several people gasped audibly. Grandma Rose put her hand to her chest. Someone whispered, "Jesus Christ." "I know it sounds like a lot," Mom jumped in. "But when you think about it as a family investment, it's really not unreasonable. If we all contribute what we can." "Linda," Uncle Robert interrupted gently, "most of us don't have that kind of money lying around. Even if everyone here contributed $1,000, which would be a stretch for some of us, we'd still be short $60,000. Dad smiled, and I suddenly understood why I'd been invited, why this dinner had been arranged, why everyone I cared about was sitting around this table. "That's where our Natasha comes in," Dad said, turning to look at me with pride that felt like a spotlight. "She's done so well for herself, bought that beautiful house, built up equity and savings. She's in a position to help her sister in a way that the rest of us simply can't." Every face at the table turned toward me. 23 pairs of eyes, all expectant, all waiting for me to respond to what was clearly presented as a reasonable request. "Tell them about your plan, sweetheart," Mom encouraged. I felt my throat go dry. I don't have a plan." "Of course you do," Dad said smoothly. "You can take out a home equity loan. House values in Pine Valley have been climbing steadily. Your place is probably worth $200,000 now. You could easily borrow what Veronica needs." "With the whole family supporting her recovery," Mom added, "and Veronica committed to paying you back, it's really a very safe investment." The words were coming at me too fast. Safe investment. Family supporting her. Paying me back. They were rewriting reality in real time, turning a potentially catastrophic financial risk into something that sounded reasonable, even noble. I started, but Uncle Frank interrupted. "That's incredibly generous of you, Natasha. Using your house to help your sister? That's real family loyalty." "It's what family does," added Aunt Patricia. "We sacrifice for each other. Cousin Sarah nodded enthusiastically. When I was going through my divorce, if someone in the family had been able to help me avoid bankruptcy, it would have changed my whole life. They were all talking at once now, praising my generosity, sharing stories of family members who'd helped each other through crises, expressing relief that Veronica would be safe. Except I hadn't agreed to anything. "Wait," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the chatter. "I haven't said I would do this." The table went quiet. Dad looked confused. "But sweetheart, we've been talking about this for days. Your mother explained how you were working out the details of the loan." I stared at him in disbelief. "I never agreed to take out a loan. I told you repeatedly that I couldn't risk my house." Mom's face crumpled. "But Natasha, we hoped that once you understood how serious the situation was." "I do understand how serious it is," I said, feeling my voice shake. "But that doesn't change the fact that what you're asking me to do could destroy my financial future." "It's just money," Veronica spoke up for the first time, her voice small but desperate. "It's just a house, Tasha. I'm talking about my life." "It's not just money to me," I replied. "It's years of work, years of sacrifice. It's my security, my future." The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. What had felt like a celebration a few minutes earlier now felt like a trial, with me as the defendant. "I think there might be some misunderstanding here," Uncle Robert said diplomatically. "Maybe Natasha needs more time to consider her options." "There's no time," Dad said sharply. "These people have given Veronica a deadline. Every day we delay puts her in more danger. And it's not like we're asking Natasha to give Veronica the money," Mom added. "It's a loan. Veronica will pay it back. And if something happened and she couldn't, Natasha would still have the house." "A house with an $85,000 lien against it," I pointed out. "Details." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "The important thing is saving Veronica." I looked around the table at these people I loved, these family members who had gathered to support what they thought was a reasonable solution to a crisis. None of them understood the reality of what they were asking. They saw my house as an asset to be leveraged, not as the result of years of brutal work and sacrifice. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "What's to think about?" Veronica asked, tears starting to flow. "Either you help me or you don't. Either I'm worth saving or I'm not." "That's not fair," I started, but she was already standing up. "No, what's not fair is having a sister who cares more about a house than about my life," she said loudly enough for the whole restaurant to hear. "What's not fair is working so hard to be successful that you forget what family means." She ran toward the bathroom, and several female relatives immediately followed her. I sat there, surrounded by disappointed family members, feeling like the most selfish person in the world, but also realizing, with crystal clarity, that I had just been expertly manipulated in front of an audience of everyone I cared about. This wasn't a family meeting to brainstorm solutions. This was a public trial designed to shame me into compliance, and I had walked right into it. I left Romano's that night feeling like I had been hit by a truck. The drive home was a blur of tears and anger, my hands shaking on the steering wheel as I replayed the evening's events. My own family had orchestrated a public ambush, using my love for them and my desire to maintain family relationships as weapons against me. But what disturbed me most was how easily they'd rewritten reality. In their version of events, I had already agreed to help. The loan was a done deal, just pending paperwork. My objections weren't legitimate concerns about financial ruin. They were last-minute cold feet that needed to be overcome with family encouragement. When I got home, I poured myself a large glass of wine and sat in my darkened living room, trying to process what had just happened. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I left the restaurant, texts from various family members expressing concern about the misunderstanding and encouragement to do the right thing. I turned the phone off and went to bed, but sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces around that table, all looking at me with expectation and disappointment. Sunday morning brought a new level of chaos. When I finally turned my phone back on, I found 17 missed calls and over 40 text messages. But it was the voicemail from Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor, that made my blood run cold. Natasha, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling, but there were some men at your house yesterday evening asking questions about you. They said they were friends of your family, but something about them made me uncomfortable. They were very interested in your work schedule and wanted to know if you lived alone. I told them I didn't know anything about your personal business, but I thought you should know. My hands started shaking as I listened to the message. These weren't casual questions from concerned family friends. Someone had been casing my house, gathering information about my daily routine. I called Mrs. Henderson immediately. "Oh, Natasha, I'm so glad you called back. I've been worried about you since those men came by." "Can you describe them?" "Two men, maybe in their 30s. One was tall and thin with dark hair, wearing a nice suit. The other was shorter, stockier, with tattoos on his hands. They had a black sedan with tinted windows. Professional intimidators. Exactly what I'd expect from the kind of people Veronica had gotten involved with. Did they say anything else?" The tall one asked if you lived alone, if you had roommates or a boyfriend. When I said I minded my own business, he smiled and said that was wise. Then they asked about your work schedule. What time you left in the morning, what time you came home. I told them I didn't keep track of my neighbors' comings and goings. "Mrs. Henderson, if you see them again, please call the police immediately. Don't engage with them at all. Are you in some kind of trouble, dear?" I didn't know how to answer that. Technically, I wasn't in trouble. I hadn't borrowed money from dangerous people or gambled away massive sums. But my sister had, and somehow that had made me a target. "Just be careful," I said, "and thank you for calling." After I hung up, I walked through my house with new eyes. Suddenly, every window felt exposed, every entrance vulnerable. These people knew where I lived, knew my schedule, knew I lived alone. They were gathering intelligence, preparing for something. Yo. I spent Sunday afternoon researching home security systems and checking the locks on every door and window. But physical security wouldn't protect me from the real threat: my family's determination to make me responsible for solving Veronica's crisis. Monday morning, I was getting ready for work when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My mailbox was open, the little red flag up as if someone had been checking for mail pickup. But I distinctly remembered closing it after collecting Saturday's mail before leaving for Dad's birthday dinner. I walked to the curb in my scrubs and work shoes, still carrying my coffee, and looked inside the mailbox. Empty, as expected since it was early Monday morning. But there were scratches around the lock that hadn't been there before. Fresh scratches, as if someone had been trying to pick it. Then I noticed something else. Tire tracks in the soft dirt beside my driveway. Fresh tracks from a vehicle that had pulled partially off the road, positioning itself to watch my house. My hands were shaking as I called in sick to work, and went back inside to think. This wasn't paranoia. These people were escalating their surveillance, preparing for direct action. I needed help, but who could I turn to? My family was the source of the problem. The police would want concrete evidence of threats, not just suspicious activity. I felt completely alone. That's when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but with a local area code. "Miss Caldwell? This is Detective Ray Morrison with Pine Valley Police. I understand you might be experiencing some harassment related to a family member's financial difficulties." My heart nearly stopped. Who told you that? "I received a call this morning from someone claiming to be your sister. She said she was concerned for your safety because you'd been receiving threatening calls related to money she owed." "Veronica called you?" "She seemed very upset, said these people were now targeting you because of her debts. She wanted us to know in case anything happened to you." I sat down heavily on my kitchen chair. Why would Veronica call the police now, after telling me for days that involving law enforcement would make things worse? "Detective Morrison, can I ask exactly what my sister told you?" "She said she owed money to some dangerous people, and that they were now pressuring you to pay her debt using your house as collateral." She was worried they might try to force you to sign legal documents or threaten you directly. Something about this felt wrong. Veronica had been adamant that the police couldn't help, that involving them would be dangerous. Now suddenly she was calling them herself? Did she say anything else? She mentioned that your family was trying to convince you to take out a loan against your house to pay her debt, and that you were feeling pressured to agree. She said she felt guilty about putting you in this position. The pieces started clicking together in my mind. Veronica wasn't calling the police to protect me from her creditors. She was calling them to document that I was being pressured to help her. Detective Morrison, did my sister ask you to do anything specific? She requested that we document her call in case anything happened to you. She also asked if there were legal protections against family members being forced to take financial responsibility for someone else's debts. And what did you tell her? I explained that no one can be legally forced to assume another person's debt without voluntarily signing documents. But I also told her that if these creditors are threatening violence or property damage, that would be criminal behavior we could investigate. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone, trying to understand what was happening. Veronica had called the police, but not to get help dealing with her creditors. She'd called to establish a paper trail showing that I was being pressured by both her creditors and my family. But why? The answer came to me slowly, like a terrible dawn breaking. If something happened to me, if I were injured, or if my house were damaged, or if I mysteriously disappeared, there would now be a police record showing that I'd been under pressure from dangerous people to pay my sister's debt. Veronica wasn't trying to protect me. She was setting up an alibi. That afternoon, I got a call from my bank. Lisa Chen, the loan officer who'd helped me with my mortgage, sounded confused and concerned. Natasha, I hope you don't mind me calling, but we received some unusual inquiries about your account and your property. What kind of inquiries? Someone called claiming to be from a title company, asking about the current value of your house and whether there were any existing liens. They said they were preparing paperwork for a home equity loan you'd applied for. My mouth went dry. I haven't applied for any loans. That's what I thought. The information they had was too detailed to be a random scam, though. They knew your full name, your address, your loan amount, even your approximate credit score. What did you tell them? Nothing. We don't give out customer information over the phone, regardless of who's asking. But Natasha, whoever called, knew enough about your financial situation to sound legitimate. They had information that should be private. After I hung up, I realized the full scope of what was happening. Someone, whether it was Veronica, her creditors, or both, had detailed information about my finances. They knew exactly how much equity I had in my house, how much I could potentially borrow, and what my financial situation looked like. They weren't just pressuring me to help Veronica, Maya. They were preparing to help themselves. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to the Pine Valley Police Station and asked to speak with Detective Morrison. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a patient demeanor, exactly the kind of police officer you'd want handling a complex family situation. Miss Caldwell, I'm glad you came in. Your sister seemed very concerned about your safety when she called. Detective Morrison, I think my sister lied to you. And I think I'm in more danger than either of us realized. I told him everything. Veronica's gambling addiction, the escalating family pressure, the threatening phone calls, the surveillance of my house, and the suspicious call to my bank. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Miss Caldwell, in my experience, situations like this tend to escalate quickly. People who owe money to dangerous creditors often become desperate, and desperate people make poor decisions. What kind of poor decisions? The kind that involve forcing family members to solve problems they didn't create. He leaned forward, his expression serious. I need you to understand something. If your sister or anyone else tries to coerce you into signing financial documents, that's a crime. If they forge your signature on loan papers, that's fraud. And if they threaten you or your property to force your cooperation, that's extortion. But they're my family. Family members can commit crimes too, Miss Caldwell. In fact, Financial crimes between family members are more common than most people realize, precisely because victims are reluctant to prosecute people they love. As I drove home that night, Detective Morrison's words echoed in my mind. Financial crimes between family members were common, people they love. I thought I was dealing with a family crisis that had attracted outside criminal attention. But what if I was actually dealing with criminals who happened to be my family? Detective Morrison's words haunted me for 3 days. Financial crimes between family members. The phrase kept circling in my mind as I tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Tuesday and Wednesday passed in a blur of hypervigilance, checking my locks constantly, varying my routes to work, jumping at every unexpected sound. But on Thursday morning, something shifted inside me. Instead of just reacting to the situation, I decided to investigate it. I started with the most obvious question. If Veronica really owed $85,000 to dangerous people, where was the evidence? I'd taken her word for everything. The amount of the debt, the identity of the creditors, even the timeline of the threats. But I'd never seen any documentation, never spoken to anyone who could confirm her story. All I had was her panicked phone calls and my family's emotional manipulation. So I did what I should have done weeks ago. I started digging. My first stop was Veronica's college. I called the registrar's office, claiming to be verifying enrollment for insurance purposes, a white lie that got me the information I needed. Natasha Caldwell is currently enrolled as a junior with a major in art therapy, the clerk confirmed. However, she's been on academic probation since the beginning of this semester due to excessive absences. Excessive absences? She's missed more than 60% of her scheduled classes. Her professors have reported that she frequently leaves town for extended periods without prior arrangement. So Veronica hadn't been attending classes regularly. That part of her story, at least, was true. But where had she been going during those extended absences? Next, I called her roommate directly. I'd met Ashley twice during family visits to the college, and she seemed like a straightforward, responsible girl. "Oh my God, Natasha!" Ashley said when I explained who I was. "I've been so worried about Ronnie. Is she okay?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out. Can you tell me about the night she disappeared? When she left that note?" Ashley was quiet for a moment. "What note?" My stomach dropped. My parents said she left a note, saying she couldn't face disappointing everyone and was going to handle the situation herself. "Natasha, there was no note. Ronnie just packed a bag and left Tuesday morning. She said she was going home for a family emergency and didn't know when she'd be back. She seemed upset, but not suicidal or anything dramatic like that." Another lie. My parents had manufactured the story about Veronica being missing and potentially suicidal to increase the pressure on me. "Ashley, has Ronnie been gambling? Going to casinos? Gambling? No, definitely not. Ronnie barely has money for food, let alone gambling. She's been really stressed about money lately, but it's normal college broke, not high roller debt." "What about trips to Las Vegas? Vegas? Natasha, Ronnie has never been to Vegas that I know of. She hardly leaves campus except to come home for holidays." The foundation of Veronica's story was crumbling. No gambling addiction, no trips to Vegas, no mysterious disappearance with a suicidal note. Almost everything she'd told me appeared to be a lie. But if she didn't actually owe money to dangerous people, then who had called me with threats? Who had been watching my house? I spent Thursday evening researching online, looking for any trace of Veronica's supposed gambling activities. Social media posts, credit card records, anything that might confirm her story. What I found instead was deeply disturbing. According to her social media, Veronica had been in Pine Valley almost every weekend for the past 2 months. Not Las Vegas, not at school, home. Her Instagram showed photos of her at local restaurants, shopping with mom, helping dad with yard work. She'd been lying about where she was, lying about what she was doing, and lying about the entire crisis that had turned my life upside down. Friday morning, I made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I called my parents and told them I needed to see Veronica immediately to discuss the loan details. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful," Mom gushed. "I knew you'd come around. Veronica will be so relieved." "I want to see the documentation," I said firmly. "The loan agreements, the contact information for the people she owes money to, everything. If I'm going to risk my house, I need to understand exactly what I'm getting into." There was a pause. "Well, of course, I'm sure Veronica has all of that information." "Good. I'll be there in an hour." I drove to my parents' house with a recording app running on my phone and a list of specific questions I wanted answered. If Veronica's story was legitimate, she should be able to provide concrete evidence. If it wasn't, her reaction to my questions would tell me everything I needed to know. When I arrived, all three of them were waiting in the living room. Veronica looked nervous, fidgeting with a tissue and avoiding eye contact. My parents seemed relieved and excited, clearly believing I'd finally capitulated. "Before we discuss any loan arrangements," I said, sitting across from them, "I need to see the documentation of Veronica's debt." "Documentation?" Veronica asked. "Loan agreements, payment schedules, contact information for the creditors? Anything that proves you actually owe this money." Veronica glanced at our parents, then back at me. I don't have physical documents." "These weren't traditional loans, Tasha. It was all verbal agreements." "Verbal agreements for $85,000? With professional lenders?" "They're not professional lenders," Dad interjected. "That's why this situation is so dangerous. These are street-level operators who don't use traditional paperwork." "Then how do we even know the debt exists?" I asked. "How do we know these people are real? How do we know this isn't all an elaborate scam?" The silence that followed was deafening. "Natasha," Mom said carefully, "why would your sister lie about something like this?" "I don't know, Mom. That's what I'm trying to figure out." I pulled out my phone and showed them the recording app. I have been researching Veronica's story, and I've found some inconsistencies. For instance, her roommate says she never left a suicidal note. She says Ronnie just went home for a family emergency. Veronica's face went white. Ashley misunderstood. I also checked with her school. She's been missing most of her classes this semester, but not because she was gambling in Vegas. According to her social media, she's been spending most of her time here in Pine Valley. "Social media isn't always accurate," Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. "And most importantly," I continued, "I spoke with Detective Morrison about the call you made to the police, Ronnie. He said you called to document that I was being pressured to assume your debt. Why would you call the police if involving them was so dangerous?" Veronica started crying, but they weren't the desperate tears of the past few weeks. These were the guilty tears of someone who'd been caught in a lie. "Tell me the truth," I said quietly. "All of it." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Veronica's shoulders slumped in defeat. "There is no debt," she whispered. The words hit the room like a bomb. Mom gasped. Dad stared at Veronica in shock. "What do you mean there's no debt?" Mom demanded. "I made it up," Veronica said, her voice barely audible. "All of it. The gambling, the dangerous people, the threats. I made it all up." "But why?" I asked, though part of me was already beginning to understand. "Because I need money," she said, looking up at me with desperate eyes. "I need money, and you're the only one in the family who has any." "For what? If you're not paying off gambling debts, what do you need $85,000 for?" Veronica glanced at our parents again, and I saw something pass between them. A look of shared knowledge, of conspiracy. "Tell her," Dad said quietly. "We're losing the house," Mom said in a rush. "Your father's business failed last year. We've been living on credit cards and borrowing against our retirement accounts. We owe more than the house is worth, and the bank is starting foreclosure proceedings." I stared at them in disbelief. "So you decided to steal my house instead?" "Not steal," Dad said quickly. "Borrow against it. Use it as collateral to save our home." "Without my permission? By creating an elaborate lie about Veronica being in danger? We hoped that if you understood how serious the situation was, you'd want to help," Mom said weakly. "So you convinced Veronica to lie about having a gambling addiction and being threatened by criminals? It wasn't supposed to go this far, Veronica said. We just needed you to agree to the loan. Then we could have figured out how to pay you back. By forging my signature on loan documents, I said, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. That's why you called the bank asking about my equity. That's why you called the police to establish that I was being pressured. You were setting up a scenario where you could claim I'd agreed to help, even if I never actually signed anything. The silence confirmed my suspicions. My family, the people I loved most in the world, had conspired to defraud me out of my home to save their own. The threatening phone calls? I asked. My friend Jake from high school, Veronica admitted. He owed me a favor. The surveillance of my house? Dad and Uncle Robert, she whispered. I sat back in my chair, stunned by the scope of their deception. Every frightening moment, every sleepless night, every tear I'd shed over this crisis had been manufactured by my own family. How long have you been planning this? I asked. Since your housewarming party, Dad said quietly. When we saw how much equity you'd built up, how stable your situation was. We were desperate, Natasha. We were going to lose everything. So you decided I should lose everything instead. None of them had an answer for that. I stood up, my legs shaky but my resolve crystal clear. I'm leaving now, I said, and I'm going straight to Detective Morrison to report attempted fraud. You've committed multiple crimes, and I have everything recorded. Natasha, please, Mom begged. We're still your family. We still love you. No, I said, heading for the door. People who love me don't try to destroy my life to save their own. As I drove away from my childhood home for what I knew would be the last time, I felt a strange mixture of devastation and relief. The crisis was over, but now it was time for consequences. I sat in my car outside the police station for 20 minutes before going inside, my hands still shaking from the recorded confession I'd just captured. The weight of what I'd discovered was overwhelming. My family hadn't just pressured me to help with a crisis, they'd manufactured an entire criminal conspiracy to steal my house. But as the initial shock began to wear off, something else took its place. Cold, calculating anger. They'd played me perfectly, using my love for them and my concern for Veronica's safety as weapons against me. They'd made me doubt my own judgment, question my values, and nearly convince me to sacrifice everything I'd worked for. They'd terrorized me in my own home, made me afraid to sleep at night, turned my sanctuary into a prison of fear. All for a lie. Detective Morrison listened to my recorded confession with a grave expression, occasionally stopping the audio to ask clarifying questions. This constitutes conspiracy to commit fraud, he said when the recording ended. Attempted identity theft, harassment, false police reports, and potentially extortion, depending on how far they were willing to take it. What happens now? Now we build a case. But Miss Caldwell, I need you to understand something. Prosecuting your own family will be difficult. Not legally, but emotionally. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the past month of hell they'd put me through. The sleepless nights, the fear, the guilt, the way they'd turned my extended family against me at that dinner. They were prepared to destroy my life to save their own, I said. I think I can handle pressing charges. Good, because I have a feeling they're not done yet. People who go this far to get what they want don't usually give up when their first plan fails. He was right. Within hours of leaving my parents' house, my phone started ringing with what I now recognized as damage control. First came Mom, crying and apologetic. Sweetheart, we're so sorry. We never meant for it to go this far. We were just desperate and scared. Can't we work something out as a family? Then Dad, trying the practical approach. Natasha, reporting this to the police won't help anyone. It'll just tear the family apart and cost everyone money and legal fees. Why don't we sit down and figure out a solution that works for everyone? Finally, Veronica, playing the victim one last time. I can't believe you'd rather see me in jail than help your own family. After everything we've been through together, this is how it ends? I didn't answer any of the calls. Instead, I used the time to plan my next move. Because Detective Morrison was right. They weren't done. and neither was I. Saturday morning, I drove to a different part of town and met with Sarah Chen, a real estate attorney who specialized in property law. I'd found her through an online search, deliberately choosing someone with no connection to Pine Valley's small-town network where my family might have influence. I need to protect my house, I told her, explaining the situation. My family tried to defraud me once. I assume they'll try again. Sarah was a sharp woman in her 40s, with the kind of no-nonsense attitude I needed. First thing we do is lock down your property legally, she said. I'll file paperwork to flag your deed with the county recorder's office. Any attempt to transfer or encumber the property will trigger an automatic review process. Can they still try to forge documents? They can try, but it'll be much harder to complete a fraudulent transaction. We'll also register your property with Identity Theft Protection Services that monitor for unusual credit inquiries or loan applications. What about criminal charges? The district attorney will handle that based on Detective Morrison's investigation. But I'd recommend documenting everything from a civil perspective as well. If they've damaged your credit, caused financial losses, or created quantifiable harm, we can pursue civil remedies in addition to criminal prosecution. That afternoon, I took another crucial step. I called Mrs. Whitman, my former client who'd become a trusted friend. "My dear," she said when I finished explaining the situation, "I'm so sorry your family betrayed you this way, but I'm not surprised you're fighting back. You've always had steel in your spine. I need a favor, Mrs. Whitman, a big one. Name it. I need you to help me buy my parents' house." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. "Explain," she said finally. "They're facing foreclosure. The bank is going to auction their house to recover what they owe, but if someone else buys it first, someone willing to pay fair market value, they could outbid the bank. And then what?" "Then I evict them." Mrs. Whitman chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "You want to use their own tactics against them. They were willing to make me homeless to save themselves. I think it's only fair they get a taste of their own medicine. How much would I need to invest?" I'd already researched this. The house is worth about $200,000, but they owe nearly $250,000 on it between the original mortgage and the home equity loans they took out. The bank will probably accept $180,000 to avoid the foreclosure process. "And you'd pay me back?" "With interest. Consider it a business transaction." Mrs. Whitman was quiet again, but I could practically hear her mind working. "I'll need to see the financial documentation, of course. And we'd need to structure this properly to protect both of us. But, Natasha, dear, I think it's a brilliant plan." Sunday was spent in intensive planning. Sarah Chen helped me understand the foreclosure timeline and the legal steps needed to purchase the property. Mrs. Whitman connected me with her financial advisor to structure the transaction properly. Detective Morrison briefed me on the criminal investigation and what to expect as it moved forward. By Monday morning, I had a comprehensive strategy in place. The criminal case would proceed on its own timeline, but the civil side would be swift and decisive. Sarah had already filed the property protection documents and started the paperwork to flag any attempts to use my house as collateral. Mrs. Whitman and I had structured a legitimate business deal where she would purchase my parents' house as an investment property, with me as the property manager and eventual buyer. Everything was legal, documented, and transparent, the opposite of my family's approach. But the most important part of my plan was the timing. According to the foreclosure documents that were public record, my parents had exactly 30 days to bring their mortgage current or face auction. They'd been scrambling to find that money for months, which is why they'd targeted my house in the first place. In 28 days, Mrs. Whitman would make an offer to the bank to purchase the house directly, avoiding the auction process. The bank would almost certainly accept, since it guaranteed them a faster recovery without the uncertainty of public bidding. And then my parents, who'd tried to steal my home, would discover that their daughter now controlled theirs. Tuesday morning, I got a call from Veronica that confirmed my family was still plotting. "Tasha, please talk to me," she said, her voice strained. "Mom and Dad are talking about hiring a lawyer to fight the criminal charges. They think they can claim it was all a misunderstanding. that they never actually intended to commit fraud. That's going to be difficult when I have them on tape admitting to conspiracy. But what if they say you set them up? What if they claim you entrapped them somehow? I almost laughed. Ronnie, I recorded them confessing to crimes they actually committed. That's called evidence, not entrapment. There has to be some way to fix this. Some way to make this all go away. There is. They can plead guilty and accept responsibility for what they did. You know they'll never do that. Then I guess we'll see what happens in court. But as I hung up, I realized Veronica had inadvertently given me valuable information. My parents were hiring a lawyer, which meant they were going to fight the charges. They still believed they could manipulate the system, just like they'd tried to manipulate me. That evening, I made one final addition to my plan. I called every relative who'd been at Dad's birthday dinner, every aunt, uncle, and cousin who'd unknowingly participated in my public humiliation. I told them the truth. All of it. Aunt Patricia was horrified. You mean there was never any gambling debt? They made up the entire story? Every word. And they were planning to forge my signature on loan documents if I didn't voluntarily agree to help. Uncle Robert was furious. They used us as props in their con game. They made us all look like fools. Cousin Michael, who worked in finance, was professional but disgusted. Identity theft between family members is incredibly common, and it's incredibly hard to recover from. They could have destroyed your credit, your career, everything. By the end of the week, my parents found themselves facing something they hadn't anticipated: complete social isolation. The family members they'd recruited to pressure me now understood they'd been manipulated and used. But that was just the beginning. Because in 3 weeks, when Mrs. Whitman's offer was accepted and the house ownership transferred, they were going to learn what it felt like to lose everything they'd worked for. And unlike their fictional crisis, this one would be absolutely real. 26 days after my recorded confession with my family, Mrs. Whitman's offer on their house was officially accepted by the bank. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to steal my home, they'd ultimately lost their own. But I wasn't ready to reveal that card yet. First, I had other business to attend to. The criminal investigation had moved quickly. Detective Morrison had built a solid case based on my recordings, the evidence of harassment, and the documented attempts to access my financial information. The district attorney had filed formal charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted identity theft, and filing false police reports. My parents had indeed hired a lawyer, expensive criminal defense attorney from Denver, who specialized in white-collar crime. According to Detective Morrison, their strategy was exactly what Veronica had predicted: claim it was all a misunderstanding between family members, not criminal intent. That strategy might have worked if I hadn't been recording their confession. 3 days before Mrs. Whitman and I were scheduled to close on their house, I got a call from my parents' attorney, Jonathan Reeves. Miss Caldwell, I represent Robert and Linda Caldwell. I understand there's been a family dispute that's unfortunately escalated to criminal charges. There's been no dispute, Mr. Reeves. There's been attempted fraud. I have my family on tape admitting to conspiracy. I've heard those recordings, and I believe there may be some misunderstanding about context and intent. Would you be willing to meet with my clients to discuss a resolution that works for everyone? I almost said no immediately, but then an idea formed, a way to close this chapter of my life with the same kind of public revelation they'd used to try to manipulate me. I'll meet with them, I said. But I want it to be at Romano's restaurant, in their private dining room, and I want the same people there who attended my father's birthday dinner. That's an unusual request. It's my only offer. Take it or leave it. There was a pause. I'll need to discuss this with my clients. You have 24 hours to decide. Mr. Reeves called back that evening. My parents had agreed to the meeting, desperate enough to try anything that might convince me to drop the charges. What they didn't know was that I'd already called every family member who'd been at that birthday dinner. I'd explained the truth about my parents' fraud, shared some key portions of the recorded confession, and invited them to witness the conclusion of this family drama. By the time Thursday evening arrived, the private dining room at Romano's was full again. The same 23 family members who'd unknowingly participated in my public humiliation a month earlier were now gathered to witness something very different. I arrived at exactly 7 p.m., carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the same forest green dress I'd worn to my housewarming party. Mrs. Whitman accompanied me, having insisted she wanted to see this through to the end. My parents were already there with their lawyer, sitting at one end of the long table and looking nervous. The rest of the family filled the remaining seats, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility toward my parents. Uncle Robert had apparently become the unofficial family spokesperson during the weeks since the truth came out. "Bob, Linda," he said as I took my seat, "I think everyone here deserves an explanation for what you put us all through." "Now, hold on," Mr. Reeves interjected smoothly. "We're here to have a productive family discussion about resolving this misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I said firmly, opening my portfolio. "There's documented criminal fraud, and everyone in this room needs to understand exactly what happened." I pulled out printed copies of key documents, bank records showing their foreclosure proceedings, the police report from Veronica's false complaint, transcripts of the most damning portions of their recorded confession. "4 weeks ago, you all gathered here to pressure me into risking my house to save Veronica from gambling debts," I began, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "You listened to a heartbreaking story about dangerous creditors and threats to our family's safety." Murmurs rippled around the table as people remembered that evening. "What you didn't know is that every word of that story was a lie. There were no gambling debts, no dangerous creditors, no threats to anyone's safety." I slid copies of Veronica's confession transcript to several family members. The entire crisis was fabricated by my parents and sister to manipulate me into taking out loans against my house, loans they planned to control by forging my signature on documents. Aunt Patricia gasped as she read the transcript. "They made up the whole thing? Every detail. The surveillance of my house was conducted by Dad and Uncle Robert, not criminals, but my own father trying to intimidate me. The threatening phone calls came from Veronica's high school friend. The story about her disappearing with a suicide note was completely fabricated." The room erupted in angry voices, family members expressing outrage and disbelief. Mr. Reeves tried to maintain control. "These are complex family dynamics being taken out of context." "Mr. Reeves," Mrs. Whitman spoke up for the first time, her aged voice cutting through the chaos with surprising authority. "I've heard the full recordings. Your clients admitted to planning fraud, identity theft, and document forgery. There's nothing complex about it." Dad finally found his voice. "We were desperate. We were about to lose our house." "So you decided I should lose mine instead," I said coldly. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way," Mom pleaded. "We thought we could get the loan, save our house, and pay you back over time. No one was supposed to get hurt. Except I would have been legally responsible for loans I never agreed to, secured by a house I'd worked years to buy. How exactly was that not going to hurt me?" "We would have protected you," Dad insisted weakly. I pulled out another document from my portfolio, the deed transfer papers for their house. "The way you protected me? Let me tell you what's been happening while you've been planning your legal defense." I held up the document so everyone could see it. "Your house went into foreclosure proceedings, just as you said. The bank was prepared to auction it to recover their losses. But yesterday, this house was purchased by Mrs. Eleanor Whitman for the full amount of your outstanding debt." My parents stared at the document in shock. "Mrs. Whitman has generously agreed to let me manage the property," I continued, "which means I now control the house you tried to steal my house to save." "That's impossible," Mom whispered. "It's completely legal and documented. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents looked like they'd been physically struck. "You can't be serious," Dad said finally. "I'm entirely serious. You were willing to make me homeless to save yourselves. Now you get to experience what that feels like." Mr. Reeves was frantically taking notes. "This could be seen as retaliation." "This is a legitimate real estate transaction," Mrs. Whitman said calmly. "I purchased a property from a bank to prevent foreclosure. My property manager has the right to determine tenancy. Everything was done through proper legal channels, unlike your client's approach. Veronica, who'd been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. "Where are we supposed to go?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "That's not my problem anymore." "But we're family," Mom said desperately. "Family doesn't conspire to commit fraud against each other. Family doesn't terrorize each other with fake threats. Family doesn't try to steal houses through forged documents." I stood up, gathering my papers. "The criminal charges will proceed regardless of this meeting. You'll need to deal with those consequences through the court system. As for your housing situation, you have the same options any tenant facing eviction has. Find somewhere else to live." Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "Bob, Linda, I think I speak for everyone here when I say that what you did was unforgivable. You didn't just betray Natasha, you used all of us as weapons against her." Nods and murmurs of agreement came from around the table. "None of us will be providing assistance with your housing situation," Aunt Patricia added firmly. "You made your choices. Now you live with the consequences." As I walked toward the door, Mom called out one last desperate plea. "Natasha, please, we're sorry. We'll do anything to make this right." I turned back to face her. "You want to make it right? Here's how. Plead guilty to the criminal charges and accept responsibility for what you did. Stop trying to manipulate the system the same way you tried to manipulate me. And leave me alone. And our house. Your house belongs to Mrs. Whitman now, just like my house belongs to me, despite your best efforts to steal it." As Mrs. Whitman and I left the restaurant, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders that I'd been carrying for more than a month. The fear, the guilt, the confusion, all of it was finally over. "How do you feel, dear?" Mrs. Whitman asked as we reached our cars. "Like justice," I said. And for the first time since this nightmare began, that was exactly true. 6 months after the confrontation at Romano's, I was sitting in my home office, looking out at the view of Pine Valley that had once brought me such peace. The same view was there, the same afternoon light filtering through the pine trees. But everything else had changed. The criminal case had concluded 3 weeks earlier. Faced with overwhelming evidence and no family support, my parents had finally taken my advice and pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted identity theft. Dad received 18 months of probation and 200 hours of community service. Mom got 12 months probation. Veronica, as a first-time offender who had cooperated with the investigation, received only probation and mandatory counseling for her role in the scheme. The judge had been particularly scathing during sentencing. "This case represents a profound betrayal of family trust," Judge Harrison had said. "The defendants attempted to destroy their daughter's financial security to preserve their own, using manipulation, lies, and fraud to achieve their goals. The fact that these crimes occurred within a family makes them more serious, not less serious." I'd sat in the courtroom gallery watching my parents accept their sentences with what appeared to be genuine remorse. But by then, remorse felt too little, too late. The civil consequences had been far more immediate and devastating than the criminal ones. My parents had indeed moved out of their house within the 30-day deadline I'd given them. With no family willing to help and their credit destroyed by the foreclosure, they'd ended up in a small, rundown apartment on the outskirts of Pine Valley. Dad had found part-time work at a hardware store, a humbling come-down from owning his own construction business. Mom had taken a job at a local diner, working evening shifts to supplement their meager income. The house itself had become a symbol of justice served. Mrs. Whitman and I had decided to renovate it completely before putting it back on the market. Every weekend, I spent hours there with contractors, stripping away the old wallpaper and carpet, painting rooms in bright, fresh colors, updating fixtures and appliances. It was therapeutic work, taking something that had been associated with deception and manipulation and transforming it into something clean and honest. "You know," Mrs. Whitman had observed during one of our renovation planning sessions, "there's a certain poetry to this. They tried to take your home and instead lost their own. Now you're making their former home better than it ever was." The irony wasn't lost on me. The house that my parents had been so desperate to save, was now worth more than ever, thanks to the improvements we'd made. When we eventually sold it, Mrs. Whitman would make a substantial profit on her investment, and I would have enough money to completely pay off my own mortgage. Financial independence achieved through justice rather than manipulation. But the most significant changes weren't financial, they were relational. The extended family had rallied around me in ways I'd never experienced before. Uncle Robert had become a surrogate father figure, checking on me regularly and offering practical advice about everything from home maintenance to career decisions. Aunt Patricia had started a tradition of monthly dinners where we could maintain family connections without the toxic dynamic my parents had created. Even my cousins had reached out, several of them apologizing for not seeing through the manipulation earlier. "We should have known something was off," Cousin Michael had told me. "The story never quite made sense, but we trusted your parents to tell us the truth." "They're very good at manipulation," I'd replied. "They had years of practice." Veronica's situation was more complicated. The mandatory counseling had apparently been effective. She'd been diagnosed with anxiety and depression that had contributed to her willingness to participate in the fraud scheme. She'd also been required to write a formal apology letter as part of her probation. The letter had arrived 2 months after the sentencing, 3 pages of handwritten explanation and remorse. "I know I can never undo what I did to you," she'd written. "I know that saying sorry doesn't fix the weeks of fear and stress I put you through. I was weak and scared, and I let Mom and Dad convince me that lying to you was the only way to save our family. I understand now that what we did wasn't saving the family, it was destroying it." She'd concluded by saying she didn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted me to know she was getting help and trying to become a better person. I'd read the letter several times, feeling a complex mixture of anger, sadness, and something that might eventually become forgiveness. But not yet. Trust, once broken so completely, would take years to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. The most unexpected consequence of the entire ordeal had been its impact on my career. Word had spread through the hospital about my situation, and rather than viewing me as someone who'd prosecuted her own family, my colleagues had been impressed by my courage in standing up to fraud and manipulation. Dr. Torres had even recommended me for a leadership development program, saying that someone who could handle a complex crisis with such integrity and determination was exactly the kind of person the hospital needed in management positions. "You showed remarkable strength under pressure," she'd told me. "That's not something that can be taught." I'd accepted the promotion that came with completing the program, shift supervisor for the ICU, with a substantial salary increase and additional responsibilities. The same determination that had helped me buy my house and resist my family's manipulation was now advancing my career in ways I'd never anticipated. But perhaps the most important lesson I'd learned wasn't about career advancement or financial security. It was about boundaries. For 28 years, I'd believed that family loyalty meant accepting whatever treatment my relatives chose to give me. I'd thought that love required me to sacrifice my own well-being for theirs, to enable their poor decisions, to always be the responsible one who cleaned up everyone else's messes. The events of the past year had taught me that real love, healthy love, requires mutual respect, honesty, and consideration for each other's well-being. What my parents had done wasn't love, even though they'd convinced themselves it was. It was manipulation disguised as family obligation. I'd started seeing a therapist myself, working through the complex emotions that came with discovering your family had betrayed you so completely. Dr. Sarah Martinez had helped me understand that feeling guilty about setting boundaries was normal, but that boundaries were essential for healthy relationships. "You didn't destroy your family," she'd reminded me during one particularly difficult session. "They destroyed the family when they chose fraud over honesty. You simply refused to enable their destructive behavior." That perspective had been crucial in helping me move forward without the crushing weight of guilt I'd initially carried. Today, as I sat in my home office, I was preparing for a different kind of family gathering, Mrs. Whitman's 85th birthday party, which I was hosting at my house. She'd become the grandmother figure I'd always wished for, someone who supported my choices, celebrated my successes, and offered wisdom without manipulation. The guest list included my supportive extended family members, several colleagues from the hospital who'd become close friends, and even Detective Morrison, who'd become something of a mentor about standing up to people who tried to exploit family relationships. As I arranged flowers from my garden and set up tables on the patio, I reflected on how much my life had changed. My house was still the sanctuary I'd worked so hard to create, but now it was also a symbol of something more: the importance of protecting what you've built from people who would destroy it, even if those people share your DNA. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Mrs. Whitman carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing a radiant smile. "Happy birthday," I said, hugging her carefully. "Thank you, dear. You know, this past year has been quite an adventure. I haven't had this much excitement since I was teaching high school 30 years ago. Any regrets about getting involved in my family drama?" She laughed, the same dry rustling sound I'd grown to love. "Regrets? My dear, watching you stand up to those people and reclaim your life has been one of the most inspiring things I've ever witnessed. You reminded me that it's never too late to fight for what's right." As guests began arriving and my house filled with laughter and genuine warmth, I realized something profound. I'd lost the family I was born into, but I'd gained something infinitely more valuable: a chosen family built on respect, honesty, and mutual support. My parents had tried to steal my house to save their own, but in doing so, they'd given me something they never intended: the knowledge that I was strong enough to stand alone, successful enough to build my own life, and worthy of relationships based on love rather than manipulation. I'd started this journey as someone who believed family loyalty meant endless sacrifice. I'd ended it as someone who understood that the most important person to protect and defend was myself. And for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.